thing about being an addict is that you do not have this. There's a part of you that wants the best for you, another part of you that wants immediate gratification, respite from the harshness of the real world. Like blood to a vampire, it's the best feeling in the universe. Anything is worth it to get it. You have to understand that the root of that is suffering, is pain. The compulsion and the addiction is happening as a way of escaping pain. Every time you lie to yourself like that, people act as if it's no big deal. It's a big deal. It means that your word to yourself means nothing. Be careful what you tell yourself and what you promise yourself.
Hi, and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, Elwin Robinson. And today we are discussing addictions and compulsions. So tell me, Elwin, why did you want to talk about this topic today?
So this is another topic that I've been meaning to get to for a while. I feel like addictive behavior and compulsive behavior often is what leads to poor health in people. We talked recently about another, environmental factor, which is toxic relationships, which are a thing that can hold you back and definitely prematurely age you. And addictions and compulsions are absolutely the same. And just like in the previous episode about relationships, I feel there's kind of a deep spiritual, even religious element to addictions, just like there is to the relationship ones, that I think is worth looking at as well. But yeah, very simply, if you want to look younger, if you want to feel younger, if you want to feel strong and healthy and happy and all the rest of it, on a practical level, the things that you're addicted to and the things that you do compulsively are probably holding you back more than anything else. Because it's all very well hearing about, you should meditate, you should exercise, you should eat healthily, you should not do this and that and the other. But most of the time, people are not lacking that information about what they should do. Now, often they do have the wrong information. So that's one of the things we try and do. We try and bring the truth and we try to look at all sides. But still, maybe a lot of people lack the information that they need to be at their absolute best, which is what we try and help with. But most people could do better with zero new information, right? If they just did the things that they already knew worked, or just stop doing the things that they already know are getting in their way. And so why not do the things that you know work if you know they work? Why not stop doing the things that are getting in your way if you know they're getting in your way? And, what would people answer for that usually? Oh, I'm not disciplined, I'm weak-willed, I'm busy, I'm distracted, I'm too tired, those kind of answers, right? But a lot of the time, except for in pretty extreme circumstances, it really is because of other addictive and compulsive behavior. People who say they don't have enough time, if you look at their phone thing where it tells you how much time you've been spending on your phone and how much time you've been spending on, different social media apps and stuff like that, like they still found time for that. And of course, if that's your job, then, fair enough, you have to do that. But, I know there are some people perhaps listening to this, watching this, who are genuinely busy, but the vast majority of us, I would say, including me, throughout most of my life, we are spending a lot of time doing things that are not really helping us and often hurting us. And so I have a history of having an extremely addictive personality, having a very addictive, family members as well, which I'm happy to show about a bit more, as we go on. And the big turning point for me in my health, one of the major things was, in my late 20s, I had, a health crisis. But the thing that turned it around is, first of all, I stopped eating junk food and I stopped taking the drugs that I was taking. And I managed to do that without any support, and I'm not recommending that, but I think the fact I managed to do it and stick at it for 15 years now means that I do have something to say about how to do it. And by the way, I tried it many times before and not been successful, trying a different method. So I think what I have to teach has value because it really worked for me. And I know even with the 12-step programs, which I'm not against, and in hindsight I would have done, the rate of people who go back to an addiction is extremely high. I believe it's above 90%. So, I feel that this method has been very effective for me. And so I can't guarantee, of course, it will work for you, but I would like to share it because it's not the usual thing that you hear in relation to addictions.
Well, thank you for that, Elwin. So let's get into it. So what would you say is the definition or the distinction between an addiction and a compulsion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's look at compulsion first. Sometimes I use the word addiction. I probably should use the word compulsion. So compulsion is something, I think when you say it, a lot of people, the only way they've really heard it is like obsessive compulsive disorder. But what does compulsion really mean? Well, it's to be compelled. So it's doing something despite maybe a part of you, maybe a higher part of you, or a more rational part of you, or whatever, not really wanting it to happen. So
kind of like scratching that itch.
Yes.
Like you just have to. Yeah.
Or the idea of even, you've been put under a spell and you're doing something despite everything in you, like, the Shakespeare play Midsummer Night's Dream, where the person wakes up and falls in love with the guy with a donkey on his head, and like it's like she's compelled to do it, right? Because it's completely not the sort of thing that she would ever normally do. So that's the kind of root of the word, is really to do the opposite of your own will. And so this gets to a quite kind of, it could get into a really deep metaphysical conversation about, who are you really and what is truly what you will and desire. And of course, there's different perspectives from neurology and psychology and religion and spirituality and etc. about that. So let's not get into all that right now unless you want to, but let's just say that there's a part of you that wants the best for you, and there is another part of you that wants a more immediate gratification, and the compulsion is where the immediate gratification wins. And so we're doing something kind of against our will, as in our higher will, for ourselves. So that's one element of it. The other element of a compulsion is that we do it unthinkingly. So a lot of the time, it's a habit. It's very frequently a compulsion, right? It's something that we do without even thinking. If you get up and you go to, and you wake up and you walk to the bathroom and you immediately, brush your teeth or go to the toilet, and you have your little routine, you always do it in this order. I do this, then this, and this. So that's a habit, but that's also a compulsion in the sense that, and this is the crucial distinction and definition, it becomes a compulsion if there is any difficulty in not doing it. That's the crucial distinction.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, in a previous episode, you talked about like those really like the neural pathways. So
Yes.
Is that what that habit has created, that track in neural network in the brain? And so it's quite easy, like we just can easily to go down that pathway?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about that. And so that's the essence of a compulsion. So an addiction is add on top of that, and this is my definition. So an addiction is always a compulsion. But with addiction, there is also an element, a biochemical element to it. So there is withdrawal, there may be downregulation. So because the thing that you've had, and it doesn't have to be a substance, it could technically be an activity, but because of the thing stimulating so much of a certain feel-good chemical, your body may then start making less of that chemical because it's trying to bring it back into balance, or your body may make your receptors less sensitive because it's trying to bring the level of stimulation that you're receiving back into balance. And so there's a biochemical element to it. That's the crucial distinction. And usually, and this is where there's a difference in definition, but usually a difference in definition is how extreme that has to be. So there may be more, clinical, medical definition is that it's only a addiction if there's a strong withdrawal element that they can actually measure and be aware of. And that's why there's claims made that some substances, for instance, aren't addictive, even though people are, obviously compulsively using them every day or many times a day, because they can't technically see, the biochemistry of the addiction, and so therefore they say it's not an addiction, it's just a behavior.
Yeah, because I was going to say, like, there's many variations to somebody's definition of an addiction. So like if somebody's going to be someone that has like 2 beers a night, every night, always, like somebody may classify that as an addiction, whereas somebody may not. So like, how do we get into like figuring out that distinction, or is it just subjective?
Well, I would say, and this is where I would agree with the mainstream definition about the withdrawal issue, and it's the same as, and so just to explain, a lot of my understanding of compulsion really comes from, spiritual teachers. So let me just explain that for a sec, and then if I forget the original question, ask me again. But so from a spiritual perspective, from the perspective of someone who wants to be awakened or enlightened or whatever, compulsions are the thing that are stopping that happening. So what a lot of spiritual teachers throughout the ages say is that most of us human beings are walking around most of the time in a state of trance, or a state of, sometimes they call it Maya or illusion or whatever. Like, we are not fully aware, we are not fully present, we are like a little bit like a zombie, sleepwalking around. That's what a lot of people who claim to be awakened and enlightened all say. And so that, sounds kind of like a vague insult, but if you look into it.
No, but I think I understand, because it's like when you're present, when you're doing things absent-mindedly, you're not present. You're really not fully aware in that moment of the action, because then you'll go back and go, oh, did I do that thing? I mean, for me, that tells me I wasn't present. I was just on automatic pilot, just going through the day.
Yep, absolutely. And, if ever like the classic example, this is when you're in a conversation and you're like, oh, and then the person asks you a question, you're like, huh, what? And that's...
I just drifted off.
Yeah. And so that's called disassociation from a, psychological perspective, and people do it all the time. And so, yeah, that's also, slipping into a trance. These are different ways of describing that, where a person is not fully present. And so that's the goal of a lot of systems, not just spiritual, but personal development, self-actualization, even, peak performance in various areas, is to be in a present state and to be in what they call a flow state, right? Mm-hmm. And so the advantage of doing things compulsively is that, well, this kind of gets to the root of it, but the advantage of it is that it's escaping feeling fully present. So being fully present, as much as it's a desirable state of being, it's also, it can be a scary state of being for various reasons that we'll go into. And so to be checked out, to be disassociated, to be in a trance, whatever we might call it, is like a respite from the harshness of the real world. That's how I think a lot of us perceive it. And so an addiction is like that, plus a biochemical high as well. So it's both a withdrawal from being, let's say, soberly present. Some people claim some drugs make them more present, and in a way that they do, but it's a imbalanced, version of it. So for instance, some drugs will increase your levels of adrenaline and noradrenaline and dopamine in a way that will make you more present, but it will also make you more anxious. It will also make you more jumpy. It will also make you more nervous, etc. So that's kind of present, but it's also an altered state of consciousness. And so that's, one of my favorite lines from Joe Dispenza when he talks about how people walk around feeling anxious, feeling depressed, feeling sad, feeling angry, all this kind of stuff. And he said, scientists will describe that as a normal state of consciousness. But he said, no, that is an altered state of consciousness. A normal state of consciousness is to feel fully present, fully centered, fully connected. So if that's true, why do most of us spend most of the time feeling, various different forms of, stress and upset? Well, most of us are actually spending most of the time in an altered state of consciousness. And when you're in that altered state of consciousness, it's very tempting to want to change that to a different altered state of consciousness, or to escape entirely, right? To be in such an altered state of consciousness that you're not here at all. You're completely disassociated. So ultimately, yeah, it's all avoidance strategies for the present moment, for various reasons why you want to do that obviously we'll get into. But does that make sense as a definition of what a compulsion actually is and how an addiction is different?
Yes, it does. It does to me. So yeah, so then going back to the definition of it being whether somebody's an addict by their usage or not, like if somebody, like I was saying in the beginning of the question, which is the 2 beers a night, are they an addict? Aren't they? Depending on who's looking at them, some people may say they are, some people may say they're not. But understanding this, if they can just go, yep, nope, never again, does that mean that they just, it wasn't that
totally
potentially biochemically, yeah.
Or even if they can do it for a week, to be honest,
right.
It doesn't, I mean, the fact, if they say, oh, I could never stop forever, then that, you're right, that is a warning sign that there is an addictive and compulsive element to it. But so if they, oh God, I couldn't stop forever, then that's a sign of compulsion or addiction. But an easy way to test it, though, because you might not want to quit everything forever, is even just a week. A week will do. Yeah. And now, if you manage a week, but you're counting down the days, 6.5 days to go, 5.5 days to go, 5 days to go, right, then it's still an addiction and you're using your willpower to temporarily suspend the addiction. It's really if you can forget all about it, right? That's the key thing. And you don't have to forget all about it forever. As I said, you could just forget about it for a week or something like that. But if it's genuinely a non-issue to you, if it doesn't stir any intense feelings in you, then I would say that it's not an addiction. Then I would say it's not a compulsion.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So then what types of compulsions and addictions are there?
So compulsions is literally almost everything that everyone does. Like the routine. So waking up at a certain time, as I said, a certain bathroom routine, shower, shave, spray on deodorant, put on clothes in a certain order, right? I do my trousers, or then I do my socks, and only then do I do my top, or the other way around. I do my top first, and if it's the same every time, and then I go downstairs and I sit in the same seat and I use the same mug and I drink the same drink with the same this, and I, do you see what I mean? And then I get in the car at the same time and I go the same route, or I always just follow what the Google Maps tells me to do without thinking about it. That is what I mean. All of that is compulsive behavior, potentially.
Potentially. I like that caveat, potentially.
Now, of course, you could observe, say, an enlightened person and a person deep in compulsion, and they might have this, you might observe their behavior in the morning and it might be identical, right? The difference is that the awakened person the next day could do something completely different and feel zero, this isn't right, this is unfamiliar to me, this is uncomfortable, all that kind of thing, which the other person who habitually, compulsively does it will feel. So it's really about the level of resistance and upset, whatever you want to call it, that you feel when you do things differently. So that's compulsions, everything. Now, addictions, I would say I'll give them all the classic list. So the substances, right? Obviously drugs, legal drugs, illegal drugs, pharmaceutical drugs. Foods is a big one. Gambling, sex, media of various kinds, TV or even newspapers. Porn, games, social media. Attention, I kind of thought of a separate one from social media because we talked about that in a previous episode, how for some people getting attention is literally, like air for them. It's the most important thing. So I had to put that in there. For the same reason, power. For some people, the feeling of power is a very, very strong and compelling addiction. A lot of the time when political and, social commentators will commentate on why, very wealthy, powerful people, what would be their motivation? They're already a billionaire. Why, and it's like they don't understand that, it's not about the money. It's to a power addict, there's nothing like power. It's like blood to a vampire. It's the best feeling in the universe, and, anything is worth it to get it. And that is kind of the mentality of an addict, right? This is the best feeling, and I will do anything to get it. And that's one of the real problems of addiction I'll get into. But anyway, let me finish my list. Shopping, classic addiction. I would put winning. I know that's like a broad category. And I'd say it's separate from gambling. It's a bit like, the high achiever who every time they get a win, every time they get a notch, every time they get a tick, a gold star or a sale.
Reinforces.
A sale, an attaboy, or whatever it may be, that feeling of, some people are very addicted to that. Achievements, different in the sense that, it's maybe something more concrete than just a well done or something like that. So achievements people can be addicted to. Any hobby really that you can mention, whether it's chess or golf or, even exercise, running.
Parachute jumping, something like that. Yeah.
That's a bit more difficult to do regularly, but any hobby that's possible, let's say, to do every day for you could potentially end up being a real addiction. So those are just some of the ones off the top of my head. So we're not just talking about drugs, definitely.
I do see some of these things characterized as diseases. Is there more of a choice element here, or does it go deeper than that? I know you did mention about the biochemical thing, so that's why I wanted to get into a little bit more on this one.
Yeah, so there's definitely a genetic component to addictions. I don't believe that we understand 100% why. So we have, various reports which are, very accurate, like all our reports in Genetic Insights, like about alcohol addiction, for instance. Cannabis addiction is another one, even though, of course, that's questioned whether there is such a thing. But I don't know if we fully understand what that is. My belief and understanding, until I'm taught otherwise, is that genetics is mainly down to the biochemistry element that we talked about before. So, if you have an alcohol addiction, maybe you have a tendency to, low levels of GABA, and that's why you like alcohol, because it boosts them, maybe in combination with, a strong gene that lets you metabolize and break down alcohol. Because if you have a weak gene for that, like I do, then you can't really handle much alcohol, no matter how much it may feel good to you. So, I suspect that it's something like that. But I suspect it's more biochemical. The other element, as you said, of behavior, and therefore also addictive and compulsive behavior, is neurological habits. And my understanding so far is that's not something that's inherited. So that's more something that's environmental. So your biochemical reality can be based on genetics, and it can also be based on, your environment and your lifestyle up until this point. But I believe that, the neurological habits are down to your conditioning, right? But they can still be heavily influenced, So for instance, if your grandfather is an alcoholic and your father is an alcoholic, then you can become an alcoholic, even if you haven't inherited the genes from them for that, simply through conditioning, right? Simply through mirroring the mirror neurons, the idea that, you observe people, and especially those who are, role models of authority to you, and you imitate their behavior, the monkey see, monkey do thing. So, that I believe that it's still down to those basic things: neurological habits and biochemical realities.
And is that why then modern medicine has really characterized some of these as a disease because of those factors?
Yeah, I mean, especially I would say it's the biochemical element that would classify it as a disease to me, because obviously if all that matters is the neurological habit, then it doesn't make sense to call it a disease. It's just, look, you got to change your behavior. It's the kind of Skinner behavioral model of psychology, which is, a little bit based on Pavlov, the idea of the dogs, like you keep ringing the bells. Like you can basically condition yourself or a patient in the same way that you condition a dog, right? You give treats, you affirm good behavior, maybe you punish bad behavior, though generally that's frowned upon for humans and dogs these days. But you basically condition them to, behave the way you want to, and over time that they will change their behavior. So that's that, school of thought. Cognitive behavioral therapy is an example of that, and there's still a lot of validity to that I'm not dismissing that. A lot of behavior can be changed through that, but I would say that the reason it often doesn't work in the case of powerful addictions is because of the biochemical element of it. And so and this can be where it's kind of hard for some people to empathize with others. Like I find it, really hard to empathize with opiate addictions because every time I have anything opiate-like, I really don't like it, and so I don't get why someone would become, would ruin their whole life over something like that. But that's only because of my biochemical reality, right? If I had a different biochemical reality, then it would be the greatest thing in the world, and I might be willing to sacrifice anything to keep getting it. So I think that it's the biochemical element that's more missing. And not by everyone, but I think generally in the addiction industry, because it is an industry, I think it's perhaps more profitable to focus purely on neurology. So, there's the rehab and the 12 steps and all the rest of it. Again, not against any of it because it's all helping with that neurological habits. But I think when it doesn't work, which is too frequently, it's because the biochemical element has been missed or not understood sufficiently.
Well, then, everything that you just said is, because one of my other questions in doing the research for this was really trying to figure out whether addicts are born or made. But what I'm hearing is it sounds like it's a combination of both, because even if that genetic predisposition is there, even if that's not there, then there's potential conditioning or there. So really, where is, in the sense, like the root cause of the addiction coming from, do you think? Is it going to be more the conditioning, more the biochemical thing, or is it just a combination of all of it coming together in like the perfect storm of why one person would be addicted and another person wouldn't?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's, it's case by case basis. So depending on obviously what they're addicted to, for instance. So there's the genetic, there is the neurological habit. I think so the question is, why is someone specifically addicted to alcohol?
Yeah. So like, why are certain people addicted to certain substances? Like, why is an alcoholic not a heroin addict and vice versa?
Yeah, that's a good question, especially when there are several substances that seem to do a very similar job. But despite that, they do a different job. So I would say it's down to a few different factors. First of all, it's the situational need. So for instance, if your thing is you never sleep enough and you don't have any energy for work, heroin is not your answer, right? It's more likely to be caffeine or maybe, something stronger, amphetamines or something like that, right? So that's part of it. Part of it is also environment. So, one of the reasons that I never did, certain drugs, and in fact also engaged in certain other things, is because I didn't have the environment. I mean, for instance, I was so poor, I couldn't be a shopping addict. I was so unattractive to women, I couldn't be a sex addict. I was so poor that I didn't have access to computer games, like at a certain point. Do you see what I'm saying? So there is that environmental thing. And this is where often it's actually harder for people who seem to have it all materially, right? So they're good looking, they're successful, they've got lots of friends, they've got lots of money. Well, that list of things I just said make it very easy to indulge in all of the different addictions that I just said, right? Whereas, having less. Now, obviously, once someone has the addiction, they will find a way to fulfill it, right? That's famous, that you've never seen someone more motivated than an alcoholic who doesn't have alcohol or a heroin addict that doesn't have heroin. So I understand that. But I'm saying whether you actually get into an addiction in the first place is partly just if it's even available to you easily or not. And then, the other issues I would say are, the genetic and the biochemical need. So if you put that all together, how does someone end up addicted to cigarettes? They almost certainly going to have people around them smoking who they look up to or who they want to join in with or something like that. Maybe it's their family, maybe it's parents, but might well be friends or whoever. So that's the environmental factor. Now, maybe they're tempted to because they're feeling, lacking of confidence or something like that, and they feel like cigarettes will give that to them. So that's the situational need. And then maybe they have a tendency for a greater need for nicotinic acid, niacin, than most people. And the nicotine in tobacco will also hit those nicotinic receptors, and so they'll feel really good as a result of that. So it's filling a biochemical need in them, which is inborn and genetic. And then, there's the habit aspect, right? They like going out for a break, a smoke break. I remember, when I used to work in kitchens, the few non-smokers would complain that they weren't allowed as many breaks as the smokers, and we would go outside. And I remember those times fondly, as much as it destroyed my health in many ways of going outside and smoking. There was a real camaraderie about it. And there are some benefits to tobacco other than hitting nicotine receptors, right? There's a bunch of them, in fact. And there's an argument that certainly not health-wise, but maybe societally, that nicotine is not such a bad drug, that it helps people to focus, it helps them to think more clearly, it energizes them. A lot of the great writers throughout the last few hundred years have used nicotine to be able to write better. It's not good for your body, but societally you could say, it's probably a good thing that it exists if, you believe that. So, these things are not always simple. But anyway, so that's one example with cigarettes. Let me give another one of alcohol, right? So situational need might be that you're feeling stressed and you're feeling tense in general. And then in the environment, someone offers you a drink, someone hands you a drink, or you see someone drinking and you can see how it relaxes them and you're, I'd like one of those as well. Genetically, you may have this tendency, as I say, towards low GABA, and maybe with a good gene to break down the alcohol as well, the aldehyde gene, and is often a problem. And then you end up with that neurological addiction. But I would say situational need, environment, genetic, and biochemical state are the key factors as to why you get involved in one and not the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's available, what's not available, what's at hand, etc.
And what helps you, definitely.
And what helps you. Right, yeah, because if it doesn't help, then, right. Yeah, that makes sense. Then just to touch base, because that was really on addictions, would it be the same for compulsions? It's like it's going to be everything that you just talked about in the same boat for the addictions, of whether something's going to come up like that? Pretty
much, yeah. So, and I suppose the other thing you can add in that's more likely with compulsions is just happenstance, right? So, for instance, why do you always brush your teeth before you comb your hair, or vice versa, right? Before you leave the bathroom in the morning? That may just be, it may be that someone else, your mother used to brush your teeth and then comb your hair and you learned that's the order to do it in. But if those are, activities that you worked out for yourself, or at some point you changed them, then maybe it's just that you did it by pure happenstance to begin with. And I mean, this is the case, like often when you first go to a new place and someone asks you to take a seat, you will sit somewhere, maybe random. I mean, maybe not, maybe, closer to them or something like that. But let's say, they offer you the sofa and you go in the middle or left or right? Now, next time you're there, you're much more likely to pick the same spot again if you're a compulsive person, like most of us are, because that now feels familiar to you. But you picked it the first time, maybe based on happenstance, or here's the other crazy thing, maybe the first time you picked it because, I don't know, it was closer to flowers that you liked or further away from something you didn't like, whatever. But maybe now the flower's gone or the things that you didn't like is gone, and you're still sitting there because you made that decision originally. And that's one, and not the only one, but that is one of the problems with compulsions. Not necessarily that the behavior is bad. I mean, I've given very innocuous examples on purpose, right? Getting up, brushing your teeth, sitting in the same seat, having the same drink in the morning in the same way. I'm purposefully not using anything that sounds bad, because most compulsions are in fact innocuous. But the challenge is, what if they don't make sense, right?
Yeah, like hoarding. To be honest, like you seem like there's the OCD, the excessively tidy person, that seems like it could be very, very helpful. But the hoarding on the other side, like not very helpful behavior for a lot of reasons.
I would say that's actually your judgment that one is more helpful than the other. I mean, they are both great examples of, much more extreme compulsive behavior. Yes. Mm-hmm. The extreme cleaning thing, I mean, based on the way you just introduced those, I would guess that you're more on that end of things. And
how'd you guess, Elwin?
And I actually agree. I mean, I am certainly in our relationship, and I like, sparse, very empty rooms and minimal stuff. And I believe everything that you own is like weighing you down to some degree. So I actually agree with you. But if I put on my objective goals for a second, I feel, well, obviously the value of the excessive cleaning is that things are clean, but the downside is a lot of time is wasted, right? If you're doing the same thing over and over again. These days, a lot of cleaning materials are full of toxic chemicals. So you're exposing yourself and the whole environment to toxicity to various degrees. Maybe it's upsetting to other people around you. So there's a lot of downsides to it as well. On the other hand, with the hoarding thing, that can get pretty awful. And I had a parent who was a hoarder, and it was horrific. And I have a very strong emotional and visceral reaction to it. But again, I can understand their perspective. And, as much as the value of the obsessive cleaner is that things are clean, the value of the hoarder is that they have a lot of stuff which may be useful, which of course is why they're hoarding in the first place, is because that's what they believe. And so obviously there is a degree of extremeness in either side where it's just obviously bad. And, like with a Hoarders TV show, and this happens with hoarders, eventually you hoard so much now you can't find anything. And so therefore it's no longer got any utility. But I would say, if you're cleaning the same thing 10, 20, 30 times in a row, any utility from that action is pretty minimal as well, right? So that's why I'm saying I think they're both equal, roughly.
Yeah, because they're both at the opposite ends of the spectrum. Is there a direct neurotransmitter or deficiency in something that's linked to either one of those?
That's a good question. I don't know about that, but I would put it down to feelings and emotions. And so we talked about this last episode when we talked about narcissists, and we said narcissists will orient their the way that they behave as a result of them refusing to feel a certain emotion, right? But there is another version of that, which is not where people will, completely repress a certain emotion, but more where they'll organize their whole lives around not feeling a certain emotion. And this is quite often at the root of compulsiveness. And this is something that's known, I would say, in the addiction community. So what they often say is that, if you look at an addict, they're behaving maybe very badly sometimes, and they do. They lie, they cheat, and very often they lie and cheat. Sometimes they steal, and it's not great. But you have to understand that the root of that is suffering, is pain. The compulsion and the addiction is happening as a way of escaping pain. So remember, I said earlier that compulsive and addictive behavior is an attempt to escape the present moment.
Yes. Yeah.
So question, why would you want to escape the present moment if the present moment is such a wonderful place, according to all these enlightened people, your Eckhart Tolles and all the rest of it? Well, the reason is, in the present moment, and maybe Eckhart Tolle doesn't agree with this, but this is my understanding, in the present moment, there are real human feelings. And especially if there is trauma, a history of trauma and abuse and neglect, and all of that is completely unresolved, then a lot of the time there is trauma and hurt still trapped in the body. And that will come up when you're present. And so really all addictive and compulsive behavior, from my understanding, whatever, it's in a way of escaping pain. When I say it might be to address a biochemical deficiency, that's still a form of pain.
Right.
A biochemical deficiency or excess. So if you have too much cortisol, you're trying to correct that. If you have not enough dopamine, you're trying to correct that. In either case, that causes a variant of pain. And so going back to your question, some of the words for the painful emotions are, like shame, like we've talked about. But some other words are sadness, right? That's a form of emotional pain. And I would say that hoarding is really a way of avoiding at all costs feeling sadness and grief, because it's to do with letting go, right? It's like, what are you going to feel? What are you going to feel having let go of something, right? It's, for them, it feels sad, right? For you, probably not, but it sounds a bit crazy.
Well, there's certain things, that I've let go and go, oh, maybe I shouldn't have.
So they really don't want to feel that feeling. I mean, most of the actions that we consider insane or awful or whatever in the world, maybe all of them, are people's ways of avoiding various feelings. I remember I saw a video recently of a guy who lived in a certain country where this was normal. I don't actually remember which one. And, someone was interviewing him and asking him why he killed his wife. And he said, well, she went outside without my permission. And the interviewer was from that culture, but he still was like, well, was that it? And he goes, well, of course. He goes, the feeling of shame of her being out there and everyone else seeing that and seeing that she doesn't listen to me. What am I supposed to do with that feeling? I had to kill her. Now, this was completely logical to him, right? Now, obviously, that's a different value system than our culture has. But my point is the lengths that people will go to avoid feeling things. And in a lot of the, especially different Asian cultures, shame is the worst possible thing you can feel, right? For them. And I would say probably the more Christian cultures, although I realize there are some in Asia, like Korea, but generally I'm talking about more like European Christian cultures. Guilt is a huge one that we don't want to feel, and that's why there's a lot of focus on avoiding that, I would say. So those are like cultural examples. So I'd say with the obsessive cleaner, the compulsive cleaner, they are trying to avoid the feelings primarily of disgust. And then second of all, also possibly of fear. But I think disgust is the primary thing. So a lot of your compulsive behavior can really be traced back to what feeling you specifically will avoid feeling at any cost. And, some people are quite gung-ho, right? And they might be like, oh, yeah, I'm okay with anger and even sadness. I cry and all the rest of it. So for that person, it may be feeling vulnerable. Or for that person, it may be feeling, something positive. Some people actually do a lot to avoid feeling, say, pride, which, or maybe that's a negative word, but let's say confident, right? Because when they were young, people saw them and said, oh, who do you think you are? You're being cocky, you're being, full of yourself, all that kind of stuff. And so they learn to associate feeling confident with shame. And so now they will avoid confidence at all costs, and they don't even know why, right? And so they always keep themselves small and always keep themselves, compliant and nice, and then all the rest of it. But it's really out of fear of feeling a certain feeling again. So it's more common to just directly avoid painful feelings, but it can even be indirect. Like in the example that I gave, people will avoid feeling achievement because they don't want everyone else to be envious at them and angry at them. They will avoid feeling love because they associate it with heartbreak or whatever it might be, right? And so, but usually it's the painful feelings directly. And so whatever your painful feeling is for you, I would say one for me is guilt. And I would say that is why I try to act in a virtuous manner as much as I can, because not because I'm such I'm such a moral person really, but because I can't bear to feel guilt. It really bothers me. So, and that's also why I act in a very disciplined manner, I guess, by most people's definition, because I would feel shame if I was slave to my compulsions. I would feel like a worm, like a maggot, like a whatever, right? I would really feel worthless if I gave in to, well, let's not say compulsions. I'm not claiming to be enlightened, but I would really feel worthless if I gave into addictions, right? If I, that would feel, shameful to me, as the story that I told a couple of minutes ago. And so those are feelings that I really don't want to feel. But the problem with that from a, enlightenment point of view is that you're going to behave in compulsive ways to avoid those feelings. And even if those compulsions are totally benevolent, so let's say, not hurting anyone because you don't want to feel guilty, or not acting stupidly because you don't want to feel shameful. Those seem like good things, but from a purely spiritual point of view, it's still you avoiding being present, avoiding feeling certain feelings, which are a natural, healthy part of the human experience to feel occasionally. And so, being totally present will involve not necessarily, certainly not feeling guilt and shame regularly, but having no resistance or fear or avoidance of feeling those feelings, right? If those feelings come up, they just come up. You're present to the feeling, you observe the feeling, you don't judge the feeling, you don't hold on to the feeling, you don't try and push away the feeling, you're just present to it, and then it comes and then it goes again, and you have no attachment to it. I believe that is what all the presence teachers teach, including Eckhart Tolle.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. I just need to take a moment to quickly tell you about a way that you can support the podcast by getting high quality, affordable supplements that Elwin and I personally use, and that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is they have great quality products with minimal fillers, but the prices are very affordable. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in my experience, they're really helpful and friendly. And what I love most of all is the amazing descriptions Elwin's written for each product category about that topic. There's so much information and education on it. I've actually learned more from reading their product descriptions than I have from most articles. So, to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, you can use promo code RejuvenateMe for a 20% discount off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order with promo code RejuvenateMe at feelyounger.net. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what I'm really hearing and understanding is that ultimately the real root causes of these compulsions and these addictions is avoiding or escaping the present moment and avoiding feeling certain feelings. And that's what's really causing these actions, behaviors to go out of control.
Absolutely. I will add in, I do think the biochemical addiction, element is valid as well, though. And so I would say, I actually wouldn't start with that belief. I would start with investigating if there is a biochemical explanation.
First.
And then if that doesn't work, which it sometimes doesn't, then look at the emotional element of it, what it is that you're trying to avoid feeling. But I think that a lot of people, again, because that is exactly the kind of thing that they do at rehab and, the 12-step programs and stuff like that. It is brilliant. But I do think the biochemical thing is the other element. So meaning, it's an odd thing to really accept that you are born imperfect. And this is, an interesting philosophical thing that I think, some religions and philosophies and political groups and all the rest of it embrace and some don't. But so it's this distinction between, are you born perfect and then ruined by the world, or are you born sinful or broken in some way and need fixing, right? And there are very strong feelings on either side about what is the case. I would say, as a result of my work with genetics, I'm now pretty convinced that the answer is you're born somewhat broken, right? You're born somewhat sinful. You're born non-perfect because you are born with all these genetic issues.
Variations, expressions.
Yes, yeah. But variations and expressions that cause suffering within the person, unfortunately. And so I feel like it is important to become aware of that, to not assume that it's only what's happened to you since you were born that's the problem, but to get to the root of what might actually be there and then address it.
Yeah, very, very good point. Then, which this takes me to, are there certain personality traits that can contribute to whether a person has addictive or, addictions or compulsions? There's those personality tests that you take out there, like extrovert, introvert, or, other things. So if somebody's more one way versus another, are they going to be more prone to addictions and compulsions?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think with compulsions, not really. I think that goes beyond the personality. So all of the personality types, right? Whether I have a tendency to be aggressive, I have a tendency to be agreeable, I have a tendency to be dominant, I have a tendency to be open to new experiences, whatever it might be. In a way, they're all kind of different flavors of compulsion, right? Because what does it mean when we say you have a personality? It means this is how you behave automatically, right? This is like your default method of being. Well, the default is compulsive by its very nature. So A truly present person is not any of those things. They're not extroverted and they're also not introverted. You know, they're not agreeable and they're not disagreeable. They will purely respond to the situation as it is without any hardwired tendency. Does that make sense? So in terms of compulsiveness, it's less about what personality you are and more about how much are you a certain personality, right? So for instance, you know, if you're very strongly agreeable or strongly disagreeable, you're more compulsive about agreeableness than someone who is mildly agreeable or mildly disagreeable, because there's less variation in your behavior. You're much more likely to be a certain way because that's how you are, irrespective of the situation in front of you. Does that make sense? So it's less about which personality and more about how extreme you are in your expression of that personality.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In terms of addictions, I think there is some research about this. I think the personality trait of impulsiveness would lead to it. I think a personality trait of less conscientiousness would lead to it. I believe that a personality trait of being more open to experience would lead to it. And those are all personality traits that have a genetic component. We have that in our personality report on Genetic Insights. And of course, to various degrees, they're also based on your nurture, your upbringing, and your environment and stuff like that. So why? So the more open to experience you are, the more that you might try something very highly addictive that's difficult to stop doing. The more conscientious that you are, the more kind of you are focused on being in control of yourself, among many other things. And so you're less likely, and also more conscientious you are, more you tend to control your time and your schedule. You're less carefree and freewheeling and we'll see what happens today. And so again, just if you're busy, you're less likely to end up getting involved in an addiction. In overall, although of course I know many people get involved in addictions while being busy, but still overall. And then the other one I would say is neuroticism. So neuroticism is a tendency to focus on painful feelings. So the more neurotic you are, the more you tend to focus on painful feelings. The less neurotic you are or secure you are, the more secure you are, the less neurotic, the more you're likely to not focus on painful feelings. So of course, if addictions are an attempt to avoid feeling painful feelings, that is going to be more tempting if you have a tendency to focus on painful feelings more than average. So yeah, in terms of compulsiveness, by my definition that I've given, it doesn't matter. But yeah, in terms of addictions, definitely. Was there any particular type you were thinking of that I might have missed?
No. That was it. Just, looking at, how somebody's personality traits could potentially lead them one way or the other. So no, there wasn't anything specific. It was just that curiosity.
I mean, does that ring true to you? I'm trying to think.
Yeah, no, I think it does. Especially in the sense of how you described it, where your tendencies are leaning to, things like that. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that could be something. It's like like a seesaw, like what's going to help balance an individual out if they're too far one way or the other. Okay, so, some people will say, that they have an addictive personality. So is that the same thing as being predisposed to addictions, or how does that fall in here?
I think, different people will mean different things by that. I feel like probably the biochemical imbalance that's the most likely to cause that kind of person who will say that about themselves is the person with low dopamine. And
why would that be?
Dopamine is, for most people, the thing that they most want to feel. And I don't think that is wrong, having, gone around it a lot and changed my mind over the years a little bit. But I feel like most of the other things that are considered like feeling really great, like endocannabinoids, like endorphins and opioids, even like oxytocin, although I used to be a big cheerleader for that and I still am to some degree. These are kind of, maybe oxytocin isn't the case for what I'm about to say, but it's definitely true of the other two. Even the natural version of it, they're kind of ways of disassociating or avoiding reality again. Now, people who are big proponents of them will not agree with me. They will say that, when your body is flooded with cannabinoids, whether they're external or, internal, then you're in a higher state of consciousness. I think that's often what they would say. But, the spiritual teacher, Sadhguru, I feel like had a really good take on that, which is, he said, whenever people try and defend these kind of things to me, substances, and he was against all psychedelics as well and all that kind of stuff, he would say, look, if someone is flying your plane or if they were your surgeon, would you want them to have high levels of cannabinoids, endogenous or not? And they go, well, no. Okay. Would you want them having high levels of opiates? Well, no. Okay. Yes, it feels euphoric, but it's making you less present. Back to that presence thing, right? So the neurochemical that really makes you present is dopamine. And so there's more to it. It's always a cocktail of different things, but it's what I consider to be true presence, the thing that can mean that flow, that you're in that flow state. Whereas, yes, adrenaline will also make you very present, but it puts you into that like vigilant for threat state, which is not what I would call true presence. So this is my belief and understanding that true presence really correlates more with dopamine, not just dopamine, but dopamine and a relative, lack of stress chemicals and a relative, good level of calming substances like GABA. But dopamine really being the key. So anyway, a person who has low levels of dopamine on an ongoing basis is going to be very tempted to do behaviors that increase dopamine, and almost everything that I've talked about increases dopamine. So not necessarily all the substances, although most of them do. Although, the few examples of like opioids don't, and benzodiazepines like Valium and things like that don't. But, most drugs will stimulate dopamine to some degree. But of that big list I read before, like, foods, gambling, sex, media, games, etc., they all stimulate dopamine. Dopamine is the feel-good chemical that they specifically stimulate. Dopamine is presence because, let's say, let's ignore the spiritual stuff for a second. There are two things that would make you present from a purely scientific, evolutionary biology point of view. So that's, that view believes that it's all about survival and reproduction, right? Which you could say reproduction, survival of the genes. So you could say it's all about survival of the genes. And so if it's all about survival of the genes, like what is going to get you to be really present? There's either a threat, so a fear, or it's a desire. And so the thing that really makes you feel the fear to get away from something, or maybe to attack something, or maybe to hide from something, is adrenaline and noradrenaline. And then the thing that really makes you feel the desire is dopamine. And so both of them will put you into a very clear present state, but only one of them will do it in a way that maintains any spiritual connection. Because when you're in a fight or flight fear state, the very nature of it is that you do not feel connected. And this is on purpose, right? Should you feel connected to the whole world around you if like someone wants to kill you? It's completely unhelpful in that moment. So this is kind of maybe a spiritual perspective, but our understanding is, let's say most animals, have you ever noticed, if you watch wildlife documentaries and you watch like a bunch of zebras and then, maybe a lion comes along and they all run away and he runs a bit more and they all run away again. Anyway, eventually the lion gets one and like a minute later, they're all just eating grass again, like totally not bothered. And so my understanding is that, most of the time we're supposed to be feeling very connected to the universe, very connected to the world around us, the people around us and all the rest of it. And then it's only when there's an actual threat that we're supposed to feel separate so that we can deal with that threat. And so, those are different forms of feeling present, right? We can either feel present and connected, or we can feel present but very much in our body, in very much like in a three-dimensional physical universe rather than an energetic connected universe, which is more how we feel when we have low levels of stress chemicals along with high levels of dopamine. So yeah, I would say that is addictive personality is someone who struggles to feel that good presence. And so what they will tend to do is they will tend to, first of all, do things that stimulate dopamine, and dopamine is very down-regulating, unfortunately, meaning almost everything that you do to increase dopamine, your body doesn't want your dopamine too high, so it will then down-regulate. You'll either start creating less of your own dopamine, it will create less of your own receptors, it will desensitize your receptors, or any combination of those things. So any increase in dopamine is almost always very temporary. And when it's not very temporary, it's very depleting. Like in the case of, if you take methamphetamine, you will be on a very consistent dopamine high for several days probably. Whereas, something like cocaine only lasts for minutes. But you've seen as well, people use methamphetamine regularly, what it does to them. Now, is that because they're on such high dopamine? I don't believe so. I think it's the fact that they're also on such high adrenaline and noradrenaline and cortisol. I think that's more the problem. And so there are not many things that stimulate a lot of dopamine without also the adrenaline and noradrenaline, both in terms of substances and even activities, right? All the stuff we talked about, the gambling, the sex, the games, the social media, the shopping, whatever, they tend to stimulate the threat as well. You might say, what's threatening about shopping? Well, what if I'm wasting my money? What if I'm being ripped off? What's threatening with a game? Or what if I lose? What if I'm humiliated? What's threatening about media? Well, most media is, murder or the news, or, do you know what I mean? So there's that element of it. Tight. What's threatening of gambling? I might lose, So that's generally, there's risk. Exactly. Thank you for summing it up concisely. So because there's risk involved, then there's the adrenaline and noradrenaline as well. My understanding and belief is that if you can manage to get that dopamine high as it will go, and in a very stable, consistent basis without your body down regulating it, that's really the key, and we can talk about how to do that. But yeah, so to me, an addictive personality is a low dopamine person. Yeah,
that makes sense. So, this has been really great. So now I just want to start moving into the aspects of, how or can people stop compulsive behavior, or can compulsions and addictions be cured?
Well, let's start with compulsions, I guess, because everything that's true for compulsions is also true for addictions, and then I'll add addictions. And remind me about the dopamine thing for addictions. But yeah, let's talk about compulsions. So we have to realize that most compulsive behavior, let's say, I don't know, we're biting our nails, for instance, right? That's an example of compulsive behavior that people try and stop. That's not really an addiction. Usually it's when you stop a compulsion, it's because you're substituting it for a different compulsion. So we have to be aware that that's usually the case. So instead of biting your nails, you're doing something else. You're using a fidget spinner or, something, right?
Yeah, so replacing one action with another action.
Yeah, but compulsively. Replacing one compulsive action with a different compulsive action. So we have to be aware that that's usually what we do and what people do. And so, the first step to break... And by the way, I can't claim that I have achieved this fully. I'm good with addictions. Compulsions, as I said, I'm not an enlightened or awakened person, so I can only give a general guide. I certainly haven't managed it totally by any means. But my understanding of what's involved, first of all, becoming more aware. And as I said, everything I'm about to say will apply to any addiction too. So the first thing is becoming more aware. So rather than doing things on autopilot, not trying to change anything, just, every morning I brush my teeth before I comb my hair. Or every time I sit down on the sofa, I sit on the left side, or whatever, right? Every time I have a coffee, I put 2 sugars and, this much milk in it. So just becoming aware of what you do is the first thing, and actually seeing the compulsiveness. Because I have made this statement, most of us are walking around, in a compulsive trance-like state most of the time. You might go, yeah, that sounds true. But that doesn't really mean very much. It's actually seeing it for yourself is crucial. I mean, an example for that applies to me that is the case in this medium is what I just did, right? Like saying all those kind of things. Those are compulsive phrases that I keep saying that often usually don't really help, and yet I just do it, right? That my higher self, as I talked about at the beginning, my part of me that knows what's best to me, knows that that's not a good idea. People don't really like it, especially when it's a lot. But I just do it anyway because for whatever reason, it feels good to do what's familiar, right? So that's an example of it. So if I want to stop that and I'm working on that and I've made some progress, first step is to become aware that I'm doing it at all, right? And not become aware in general, like you telling me, Elwin, you say a lot, but for me to realize in the moment, oh, I just did it again. I just did again. Oh, I just did it again. That's the crucial thing. So it's becoming aware specifically, not becoming aware generally. Actually watching yourself do it. That's the first thing. And that is like a very profound practice in a way. That's building awareness, which leads us into the next thing, which is practicing awareness. So practicing presence, which is often called meditation, right? So doing some kind of meditative practice, not the kind of meditation where you kind of check out, tune out, and listen to some kind of guided visualization thing. I'm not against that, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking more about like a mindfulness meditation or a meditation where you become aware of your breathing, meditation where you become aware of your body, like yoga nidra, something
would it be kind of like practicing focusing on something specific, or is this something slightly different?
No, you're right. I mean, practicing on focusing something specific is a great way of realizing how unpresent you are. This is something that I used to do when I used to do more advanced yoga practices. So a great example of this, Chris, that you can try, anyone listening to this right now can try, is this. Find a spot on the wall and the ceiling that you can look at comfortably without craning your neck like I'm doing now, right? And then just stare at it and do whatever you can to stop your awareness drifting away. And it will drift away in two different ways at least. First, it will drift away in terms of, you going into a kind of daydream, a waking dream. Secondly, it will drift away in terms of, I might start looking over there, or, oh, there's a fly has just gone past and now I'm following the fly instead of staring at what I'm supposed to be, right? If you are really, really relentless about this, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second, you will find, and I guarantee this, if you're relentless enough, you will start hallucinating full blown more than you will with LSD or, mushrooms, maybe as much as you would with something like DMT, just by trying to stare at a dot. It turns out, and I learned this from one of my spiritual teachers early on, he said that focus is such a difficult thing that like sometimes God Almighty himself will come along to like distract you from doing it. It's actually amazing what you can experience when you just relentlessly try and focus on one point. So the visual one I found to be more effective. Some people do an auditory version of that, right? They'll just keep repeating a mantra, the same thing to themselves, om, om, or whatever, right? That's trying to achieve the same thing. That's not as amazing because having auditory hallucinations is not such a big deal compared to visual hallucinations are very, shocking to most people, but it's actually the same thing. If you obsessively, relentlessly try and keep focusing on the same sound, you will also start hearing weird sounds and stuff like that come up in an attempt to distract you from it. So that's not an easy thing to do to get to that, but I'm saying if you really, really, really carry on and not give up, it doesn't take long. It takes minutes of absolute fixed point concentration. That's what it's called, fixed point concentration.
What's going on internally that's causing you to see different things than just the spot on the wall?
I don't know if it's really been looked at neurologically, but my simple understanding of it is that it's that thing about avoiding presence again. Like your body will do anything to avoid presence. I think there's other spiritual factors going on with that, but I would be going well into the realm of, talking about something different and also speculating. So I'll leave it at that. It's just like some part of your mind's attempt to distract you from being present. Let's just put it that way. And so you will never be able to stare at the dot, let's say for 10 minutes without being distracted by something, whether it's moving your eyes or a hallucination or daydreaming or whatever. But the attempt of doing it repeatedly and the attempt of sitting down quietly and watching your breath for 20 minutes or whatever it might be, any of those practices will develop a skill which is absolutely extremely useful when it comes to addiction. And it's absolutely crucial if it comes to compulsions, which in a way compulsions are weaker than addictions because an addiction is just a compulsion plus a biochemical issue imbalance. But in another way, being free of all addictions is way easier than being free of all compulsions, right? Because compulsions is such an intricate part of our life. So it's easier to give up a particular compulsion than a particular addiction. But it's very, very difficult to give up all compulsions more than all addictions. So, but the thing that makes it possible is the next step. So if you do this practice, so you do like control of breath is another thing, often called pranayama. So you become aware of your breath, you become conscious of your breath. Often, doing practices to control your breath, so 4 seconds in, hold for 4 seconds, 4 seconds out. We're doing an episode, or I've done an episode soon about, different breathing practice, Buteyko, where again, in that one, you're holding your breath as long as possible. So that again requires a very high amount of presence, because if you snap out of being present for even a second, you will compulsively breathe because it's what you want to do, right? So any practice like that, getting into cold water is another example, and something that Wim Hof talks about as being, very powerful, and he's proven this in the lab of, getting you into a meditative state actually more powerfully than most, or maybe all, systems of meditation. So absolutely sitting and focusing, absolutely sitting and not necessarily focusing, but just attempting to be aware and not distracted. Absolutely breathing control, pranayama. Absolutely fixed point concentration with your eyes, or fixed point concentration with a sound. Those are all what they all have in common, other than like they won't get you to being fully present forever until that moment of enlightenment, but they will build a habit of being present, just as we talked about earlier about how it's all down to biochemical realities and the neurological habits. So rather than going down the compulsion neurological pathway, you'll start going down the presence neurological pathway more. But there is another benefit other than that. And it's the benefit that the term that I first heard was unbending intent, or otherwise known as true will. So the thing about being an addict is that you do not have this. You do not have unbending intent, inline will, or true will. You have a very bending intent and a very weak will, right? And how do I define that? I'm not saying that all addicts are weak will people, because I know some alcoholics, for instance, are, very can be very disciplined, very successful in their career or in their, sporting endeavor or whatever it might be. So I'm not saying that you are completely weak-willed, but what I am saying is this quality of unbending intent or true will, the crucial thing about it is that it can be applied to anything, not just a specific thing. So what you tend to find is that people are very brave, very disciplined, very aware, etc., within their specific niche, right? So maybe they're really good in relationships, maybe they're really good in, exercise, maybe they're really good in their career, maybe they're really good in, this or that, sports or whatever, right? But the problem is they can't carry that over. One of my friends is always saying this. He's been saying it for years. He goes, I can't understand that this person can be so successful and yet so lazy with this, or so kind of stupid with this, like how someone is so, they're a top athlete and yet they can't keep their, what in their pants, or how they're a top business person and they can't make themselves, and they can't stick to a healthy diet or something like that, right? It's and that's because they may have willpower and discipline and all the rest of it in a niche, but it's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about unbending intent. I'm talking about true will. That can be applied in any place. And so I
was going to say, so that you're talking about that being across the board, like in every area of your life.
Yes. And and so I relate it to this issue of actually integrity. So these are the next notes that I made. I believe that one of the things that you have to do is learn to value integrity and truth. And so, and see that as a really high value. You may not keep that as a high value for all your life. Maybe you'll end up doing something else. But if you're in that phase of needing to break out of compulsions and addictions, I believe that you have to start valuing that very highly. Everyone knows that every addict is dishonest, right? That's just the tendency. That's one of the other, I know the famous TV doctor, Dr. Drew, he talks about his definition of addiction. And one of them is if you feel the need to hide it, right? If you're honest about it and it's no big deal and you can freely talk about it with anyone, you don't keep it a secret or hide it, then that's an indicator to him that it's not an addiction by his definition, right? So there is a tendency to dishonesty, even if it's just hiding and withholding and, stuff like that, even if it's not active lying. And so, but often it is active lying, right? For various different ways. With any serious addiction, it certainly is. Well, as much as addicts may be dishonest with other people, either by omission or active deceit, the person they're most dishonest with is themselves. If you think about it, like a smoker, how many times does a smoker that has said to you that they're going to quit and not do it? Well, they've said it to themselves 10 times more often, And this goes, and I'm talking more about addictions now, but it goes for compulsions, right? It's like, let's say you want to get up in the morning and you want to run or walk or do exercise, right? And then you wake up the next morning, or maybe, you want to get up earlier. You want to get up at 6 a.m. so you have time to do that. Or you want to get up in the morning to do meditation because you just heard this episode or whatever, right? And then it actually comes to it and you're like, ugh, I don't really want to do it, right? The person last night who said they wanted to exercise or meditate this morning is not the same person as this morning. That person wants to go back to sleep, right? That person wants to go back to bed. And, ditto, the person who says, I'm not going to drink tonight is not the same person that night who's, actually, I really would like a drink, right? So now, of course, it is the same person, but I'm saying it's experienced as being a different person. And so that discordance between that you at lunchtime who said to a colleague, I won't drink tonight, and then in the evening who's actually says, go on then, or that difference between the person at night who says, I'm going to get up early tomorrow and do a meditation, and then that person in the morning who doesn't do it. Every time you lie to yourself like that, people act as if it's no big deal. It's a big deal.
Right.
It means that you have no integrity with yourself. It means that you have no trust with yourself. It means that your word to yourself means nothing. And people really miss the boat to me with this issue, big time. And I'll give an example of it. Let's say that you promised yourself you're going to do something today. And then someone comes along and says to you, I need help with something. If your tendency, your compulsion, let's say, I know everything is on a case-by-case basis, but if you compulsively help them because they need help, for instance, that feels like you're being a good person. But what that's also actually doing is ruining your own integrity and trust with yourself. And it's also destroying that quality, which I'm calling unbending intent, which is I'm just going to do it, or I'm just going to not do it. Either way, right? Why? Because I said so, and that's it. That's the attitude of unbending intents. No excuses, no ifs, ands, buts, maybes, right? This is a lot of the time what's called a disciplined attitude, but I'm trying to distinguish it from discipline because I realize there's a lot of people who are disciplined in certain areas, but not universally. And so this is what I mean about it being universal, is it's your word to yourself. And a lot of people will, I would say it's more important to keep your word to yourself, even if you're in a situation, let's say you told yourself, tomorrow morning I'm going to meditate, but you told someone else tomorrow morning I'm going to pick you up and drive you to the airport. I actually believe, again, maybe not in all phases of your life, but in I'm trying to break out of addictions and compulsion phase of your life, that promise to yourself is actually more important than that promise to the other person, right? Unless that person really is more important to you than you, for whatever reason, maybe they save your life, maybe they're your parent or they're your child or something like that, right? But I'm saying, like, you're still telling yourself that person and my word to them is more important than my word to me. That's still the side effect of that, even though it is understandable.
Let me ask you this, so because just something popped into my head. Let's say you did make that decision. You're at lunch. You made that decision. I'm not going to drink tonight. A friend who you haven't seen in 5 years flies in, surprises you, and say, "Hey, let's go out for a drink tonight because I'm probably not going to see you for another 5 years." Then what would somebody do? Are they still then, not valuing that integrity of that decision that they made earlier? Or is it a different situation because there's new information that they had? I'm just throwing that out there to see where that lands.
Well, like I said, it has to be taken on a case-by-case basis if you're a truly present person. Otherwise, you're being compulsive again. However, the point of this is actually less to be very rigid, which I think is what you're pointing to as a potential downside. The point is actually much more to be careful what you tell yourself and what you promise yourself.
Very good point. Very good point. Especially if you tell yourself consistently, "I'll get up and I'll do it tomorrow. I promise I won't have that ice cream," or this and that, but you are continually breaking your word to yourself on those points.
Absolutely. And that's where I said earlier that you have to learn to value truth and honesty and integrity as a virtue in and of itself, right? Not, specifically for this reason, so you can start to build up this quality of trust in yourself again, so that you believe your word. I mean, integrity is a funny word. I think all kinds of virtues are attached to it, but the simplest definition I've heard of it is just, I do what I say I will do. That's it. Now, there can be some flexibility around it. Like, for instance, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to say, I will get up tomorrow at 6 a.m. and meditate no matter what, because something might stop you. But I think what could work is, I will meditate for 20 minutes every day no matter what. Even if everything stops you throughout the day, crisis to crisis to crisis, demand, 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 demand. Eventually you'll end up in bed ready to sleep, and then you do 20 minutes of meditation before you fall asleep. Do you see what I mean? There's always a way. If you are committed and if you have integrity enough with yourself that you are true to your word. And that's that quality of unbending intent. But as I say, to just try and shift into that is difficult, which is why I mentioned all the practices earlier. If you practice controlling your breath, if you practice controlling your focus, if you practice fixed point concentration, if you practice being more aware of your body and staying present, it will be much, much easier to stick to your word. Because if you don't practice those things, if you don't practice the more active things like fixed points concentration, then it'll be too easy to bend and just go along with. And if you don't practice the awareness aspect, it'll be too easy to find yourself doing it and you don't even know it happened, right? Hasn't this happened all the time? Especially, I think, with food, it's very common. I'm not going to eat that. And, oh my God, what am I doing? And people do that with actually all kinds of things. People do that, with smoking, drinking. People do it with sex. Oh, I ended up in bed with, I ended up cheating on my wife or husband again. It's like, how did that happen, right? People do even the most elaborate things compulsively and unconsciously, and then afterwards go, what the hell happened? I didn't even realize I was doing it. So that combination of the awareness plus the ability to really unbendingly stick with something is extremely valuable. Now, it is so valuable that a person can overdo it. As you mentioned earlier, you can be too rigid. You can become compulsive about being unbending. But then you are using your keys that you could be using to free yourself to, in fact, lock yourself in, right? It's creating more of a problem.
Yes, it's like when somebody's too extreme with something, the longevity of that is not going to last. It's not going to be sustainable.
I agree, but the important distinction is, because a lot of people would say, saying you're going to do something every day or every week or whatever, no matter what, they would say that is too extreme, right? And so I would say the distinction around it is, be flexible about the how, but be unbending about the what. So if it's like, it has to be at this time, at this person, in this situation, at this, then often there'll be a reason you can't do it. And then you've just ruined your reputation with yourself again, because you've broken your word to yourself. Mm-hmm. But if you're smart about it, and you're like, at some point every day I'll do this, or at some point I will, or let's say it's a bigger goal, I want to lose 100 pounds of weight or whatever, right? If it's like I want to lose 100 pounds in 90 days or whatever we consider healthy, a year or whatever. If it's, let's say 6 months, if it's, I want to lose 100 pounds in 6 months and I will do it no matter what, you might end up in hospital because you're overdoing it, trying to reach a certain deadline, right? But if you're like, I am going to lose 100 pounds no matter what, and you mean it, but there's no time limit on it, then you can do it in a safe, healthy, non-compulsive way. You can keep taking actions that will lead you towards that outcome, but without being rigid, without being compulsive, without making things worse.
Wonderful, Elwin. This is really good.
And I know that attitude of I will do it no matter what scares a lot of people. They immediately go into, but what about this? What about that? And I would say that is the addict speaking. And it's the addict compulsive thing, right? Because it's the same thing if you smoke, or if you drink and then you say I'm not going to drink anymore. It's like, but what are you going to do with someone off drinking? And what about Christmas? And what about when you feel really lonely? And what about if you're depressed? And what about if this? And what about if that? Right? That's the addict's mind speaking, trying to tell you that you can't do this thing. Well, there is a force, and I don't want to go into it. You kind of tried a little bit earlier, maybe we'll do it in a different episode, but there is a force that is trying to keep you from being this present, fully actualized, awakened, whatever you want to call it, person, right? And so to me, that force is that voice. What about this? What about that? What about that? Don't be present. Don't develop an unbending intent, don't become fully in the flow of life. Like all the reasons. What about if you're suffering too much? You don't want to be present because what about if this really painful feeling comes up? Like that's the whispering of the little devil in your ear to me. That's understandable and normal, but it's not helping you. And so that leads me to my last point. And I mentioned this in the previous episode as well. And so I'll get into this a little bit. I think addictions and compulsions are in a way a symptom of avoiding pain, like we've talked about. Mm-hmm. But another way of looking at it is that they are actually a symptom of a lack of a connection to a higher, bigger principle than self. And so, we have a kind of epidemic in that. Not only do we have the biggest human population, as far as we know, ever, but we have the biggest percentage of the human population ever that does not have a sense of connection to a higher principle.
And when you say a higher principle, what are you specifically speaking of?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and this is a very important distinction. So throughout most of history, that higher principle would be either religious or spiritual. It would be, God, either God as a more abstract thing, like, a father in the sky or in heaven or something like that, or it would be more animist, pantheist, kind of like nature all around us, right? So the thing bigger than me is, the ocean, which is vast. The thing bigger than me is the forest. It's, beyond my comprehension. The thing bigger than me is the stars, right? Like they're infinite. I don't understand, So it's that kind of thing. But we have to understand that we look at the stars and go, okay. Or maybe start naming them and stuff like that. But, someone a few thousand years ago looks at the stars like, whoa, like, wow, what is that? That's like a huge mystery. And that's why, correctly or not, they created astrology and, myths, and they saw them as various gods and deities and all the rest of it, because that to them is like a transcendent thing. That's something bigger than them. And I would say, a lack of connection to those kind of things is part of the problem. If you live in a big city, you never see a vast expanse in front of you. That doesn't help the situation. That makes it easier to get into a narcissistic state of feeling like the whole world revolves around you, which we all start off feeling that way. Some of us grow out of it, some of us don't, to various different degrees. But I would say that's probably always been the case. But we've had, so both the physical reality of nature and then also a belief system, a religion, right? For a lot of people, throughout a lot of history, I believe it's ancestor worship, right? What I want right now is not nearly as important as all the ancestors that made my life possible. It's as simple as that, right? And so and I think this is still true for a lot of cultures in this world to this day, that they don't become, heroin addicts, or they don't become various things that are seen as, sinful or whatever. In most cultures, I realize not in ours right now, because that would bring too much shame upon their ancestors. So the thing bigger than them is just, and I'm talking about ancestors like people who died, but another example
lineage.
Lineage. But another example is just the extended family, right? Mm-hmm. That's another example of something bigger than yourself that will stop a lot of people getting into addictions. Now, a lot of time people have the addiction anyway and hide it from the family, or maybe everyone in the family has the addiction. And I think that is the problem. So nation state is another one. Nationalism is out now as a thing. Mm-hmm. You're not supposed to be proud of your country. You're not supposed to identify with your country. So my understanding is, though, the more limited it gets, the worse it gets. So if the thing bigger than yourself is just your family, then all your family might be addicts, right? That's not helping, If it's just your village or your town or whatever, then that's bigger still, but that's still quite limiting, and your country, or, a certain philosophy, like I'm a communist or I'm a fascist or whatever, like all of these things are quite limiting. And then the best thing is something that's infinite, something that's eternal, right? Which we would often call either religious or spiritual. If you have an experience of feeling a connection with, or an awareness of, the infinite, which again are the kind of experiences that you can have quite easily if you follow all the techniques that I shared for developing awareness and developing unbending intent, then that feeling of connection to something greater than yourself will often be very helpful for overcoming an addiction. And that's why it is one of those 12 steps, to be aware of what they call a higher power. Now, seeing yourself in context maybe with something greater than yourself is one thing, but obviously that on its own can just leave you feeling small and meaningless. And so, and that can again lead to a tendency for compulsion and addiction. So the other thing I feel is crucial is to find and then actually feel on a moment-to-moment basis a higher meaning for your own life. And I really feel that is the reason why we have such an addiction epidemic at the moment. It's opiates especially, but it's amphetamines and it's all the rest. And if you want to look at the milder drugs, it's certainly caffeine for almost everyone. It's media or social media for almost everyone. So almost everyone is in this addictive and compulsive state. And I believe one of the reasons is because we don't feel like our lives have a profound meaning or purpose in the right way. When I say in the right way, well, we just talked about narcissism, and that's in the wrong way. If you feel like God has chosen you, or whatever, some higher force has chosen you and made you special and better than everyone else, that's not necessarily going to help you. But if you feel like I have a purpose that is meaningful, given to me by a force greater than myself, so does everyone else. So it doesn't make me better than or superior to anyone else, but I have that and I feel it and I'm connected to it on a moment-to-moment basis. Then the feelings that come up during my life, during my day, during this moment, the temporary feelings, the sadness, the disgust, the shame, the guilt, whatever is feelings that are, so bad that they can be unbearable, are no longer unbearable because I have that context. First of all, the context of there's something greater than myself that's maybe benevolent. I guess that's an important part of it. And then the other thing is, this is only temporary. I have a purpose that is beyond this. The reason why sadness can become despair, or the reason why anger can become rage, or the reason why fear can become terror or paranoia, or the reason that disgust can become, just like a hatred for the whole world, is because of that lack of awareness of a bigger purpose and a bigger context, right? So if it's like, I'm on a mission from God, Again, doesn't make me special, doesn't make me different from anyone else, but I'm on a mission from God. And now I'm upset, now I'm sad, now I'm afraid. That's like a bump on the road. That's like with the meaning of it, that's a challenge, that's a trial, that's a tribulation, like the old myths, right, of the gods or the half gods, like overcoming, the Hercules and his 12 tasks, Jesus and his going to the desert and being tempted by the devil, all of that kind of thing. I'll give you an example for me, because I do this. If I have some issue come up with health or someone else does, rather than feeling upset or sad and despair, I'm like, oh, I've been given this for a reason. And the reason is so I can learn about it and overcome it and share it with others. So that's the practical example of what I'm talking about, right? So rather than being something that's unbearable and I'm resentful against God for giving this to me, or against life to giving it to me, and I'm confused and, in feeling of chaos because I don't understand it, and I'm afraid of what it might mean, and I'm angry that I have to deal with it, or frustrated I have to deal with it. Rather than all of that stuff, it's actually just a challenge that God has given me in the positive sense to overcome. It's almost, again, a little bit biblical, like, the kind of Lot's attitude, that everything, or was it Job? Sorry, I'm no Bible expert. That every bad thing that's put in front of me has a meaning. And that is something that I have practiced for a long time, funnily enough, ever since I stopped being an addict. Is that everything that comes up, I don't necessarily say to myself, God has given this to me for a reason. What I do is I ask, what is the purpose of this? What is the reason for this? So I assume that there is one, and I ask what it is.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com, because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code Rejuvenate. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code Rejuvenate for 20% off today. Yeah, there's an opportunity here. There's a deeper meaning behind it for me, for something. Maybe I don't know it yet, but it will become, that awareness will come to me in time.
Yes, but I would recommend more proactively. What is it? Because then it gives your mind something to focus on.
Right.
And maybe it's a distraction technique. I don't know. But I feel like to find that meaning is important, because then, as I said, you don't need to escape the feeling anymore. No, absolutely. Yeah. So with these that you've put in front of us, the awareness, the practicing awareness, the unbending intent, and then, the connection with a higher principle, once somebody's working on this, has this, what happens next? Magic. I mean, honestly, the whole course of my life, I was, an addict, in debt, minimum wage job, no social life, no sense of purpose, nothing before I took on all this. And my life changed so radically as a result of taking all this. If I were in a bit of a disassociated moment, I could go, I don't even know if any of this is real, because it's so radically different from how things were before. No, it's not perfect, but I feel like it has gone from like a mechanistic nightmare to, let's just say, an adventure, right? Not always positive, maybe, but it's it's something that I'm happy to be part of most of the time and begrudgingly willing some of the time, as opposed to before where it was just this grim slog. And yes, I know when you know, consciously a lot of people may not feel that it's a grim slog while they're in the middle of an addiction. But hedonism, so that's the pursuit of pleasure. If you remember, I said near the beginning that, compulsion is essentially not listening to the voice about my, higher purpose and just listening to what's going to make me feel good now. So what's going to feel good now is hedonism. And hedonism seems appealing, and it's made to look appealing by certain, media and maybe even people in your life and stuff like that. And of course, the high of hedonism is very enjoyable if the alternative is just, dull, boring, or unpleasant suffering, which is what a lot of people live. But hedonism to me is really characterized by the lows, not the highs, different. I think the movie Trainspotting is a good example of that. Requiem for a Dream, I think, is another good example of that. Like the highs are relatively short-lived with a hedonistic lifestyle before long. And that's, because of biochemical, neurochemical realities, as well as maybe spiritual principles. But it's not easy to see through that if the alternative is just, like a dull, boring life or a life of suffering. And so you really need that connection to a higher power, to a transcendent purpose, I would say. And yeah, life is completely unrecognizable. Now, here's the other interesting thing. Once you develop unbending intent and you can apply it to anything, you can actually excel in any area where you have a genuine desire to. So let's say you really, really want to be a musician, but you never learn how to do it. Now you'll be able to do it, because the only thing that's stopping you being a musician, other than maybe a very low level of innate talent, is actually that you didn't have the discipline to practice and persist, despite probably not being very good to begin with, right? But now if you apply your newly developed unbending intent to it, you can become at least a pretty good musician, maybe an absolutely amazing musician, right? And that's true for any other skill. You want to become good with the opposite sex, you want to make money, you want to, go and help a load of people in charitable endeavors, you want to, sculpt the perfect body, whatever it is that you want to do. Certainly in terms of that kind of stuff, superficial stuff, and even in terms of profound stuff like we've talked about, maybe like spiritual advancement or, virtue cultivation, if you want to look at it from a more religious point of view, that all can come about as a side effect of unbending intent. I think that's the interesting thing. If your goal is to have unbending intent so that you can get rich, for instance, or so you can get, the relationship of your dreams or whatever, it doesn't actually work that well necessarily. Sometimes it does, but it's very unreliable, even if miraculous things happen sometimes. But if you develop unbending intent as a desirable thing, a virtue in and of itself, you can then apply it to everything else. Do I think that I've got an amazing unbending intent? No. But I do think the degree to which I developed it helped me to profoundly shift my life from, as I said, something very miserable and something very boring to something that a lot of people would, envy. So I don't think you have to be, perfect, and I don't think you have to be, world-beatingly impressive. And you just apply it to the areas where, and again, this is the thing, you might meet people like with the Buddha, like he's overweight, and it's like, why is he overweight? Well, there's this example of that, right? If you're so this, then why that? And I think part of it is back to, as I just said, that higher purpose, that higher meaning that you have. When you have the unbending intent, you're still only going, if you're sensible, you're only going to apply it to the areas that the higher power you're connected to desires you to. And so, you might still be overweight. It's possible, although I wouldn't expect you to be very overweight, because if you are, then eventually it's going to reduce your ability to be effective and do your purpose. But take you out of balance. Yeah. But to a certain degree, do you see what I mean? You can be imperfect in all kinds of ways, and it doesn't necessarily mean you don't have that quality. So don't be fooled by that, because you'll really just apply it to the areas that are truly meaningful to you. You know, like an advanced theoretical physicist, for instance, you know, may not be good in lots of areas, but it's because they only care about one thing. How you distinguish that from someone who's unable to apply it to anything else is, of course, very tricky. But it's not that tricky if you know them for a while, because here's the key thing, right? So let's say, you know, you have someone in your life and they get to a certain point and then they have a crisis, right? They have a health crisis, they have a career crisis, they have a money crisis, they have a social crisis, whatever it may be. If they can't apply unbending intent to resolving that issue, then they don't have it. So that's how you know if it's a choice or not. So someone may be overweight and, you know, really have unbending intent because they're just choosing not to prioritize it. But if they, I don't know, have a heart attack or something like that and they still are not prioritizing it, even though it's stopping them being able to do their work, then you know that they don't actually have it. Or then you know that you don't actually have it if you're not sure if you have it. So that's, you know, the only way to really, really tell, because it doesn't make you perfect. You know, being enlightened doesn't make you perfect. You can see that in the people who claim to be enlightened, who you believe in. But it gives you the option of developing any area if it truly is, you know, part of your purpose in life.
We were talking about dopamine earlier, and you said, you know, just remind me about dopamine. Was there anything else that you wanted to add about dopamine here before we start making our way to our close?
Yeah, let's finish with that. Okay, so everything I just said also applies to addictions. But the addictions, we also need to see what the biochemical root of it is. So I'll go through the list quickly. With most of them, it is dopamine. So I'll start from the bottom up of my little list here. So hobbies, depending on what it is, it's often dopamine. But sometimes it's also oxytocin and vasopressin, meaning if the thing that you enjoy about the hobby and the reason why you're compelled to do it is because of the feeling of bonding and connection and camaraderie with others, that might be, you know, the thing that's causing the addiction. Sorry, before I carry on the list, I'm trying to say, depending on what your addiction is, it indicates the biochemical imbalance that you then have to deal with. I'm not going to be able to tell you how to resolve each biochemical imbalance in this episode, but we've done other episodes before on how to resolve them. And if people are interested, I'll do a full episode on how to resolve each biochemical imbalance. But anyway, so if you are addicted to achieving things, that's really going to be dopamine. That's the thing that you're low on. If you're addicted to winning, that's going to be dopamine. If you're addicted to shopping, that's probably going to be dopamine as well. Obviously, if you're doing it, you know, with someone, in case of everything I said, that could be low oxytocin and or vasopressin as well. Those are the bonding, camaraderie hormones. If you're addicted to getting attention from others, that can be low levels of dopamine. That can also be a serotonin issue. I don't know if it's necessarily low serotonin. That's something I'm still investigating. It may actually be high serotonin that makes you more concerned with other people seeing you. So that's something I'm not sure about. I'm still looking into that, but it's also a serotonin issue. Social media, so if it's for feeling connected to others, then it's oxytocin and vasopressin. If it's to feel special and important, then it's more serotonin. If it's to feel, you know, the newness, the novelty, interest, curiosity, stuff like that, then it's dopamine. Games, you know, can be the bonding of oxytocin and vasopressin. But I think, again, it's mainly dopamine. It's, you know, the novelty and the winning. And a lot of these companies, like social media companies, gaming companies, companies who are selling stuff, so shopping, they know about dopamine and they're specifically doing stuff to stimulate dopamine you because they know it will make you take the actions they want, spend money, whatever, keep coming back. Porn is going to be dopamine. Again, maybe oxytocin a little bit and vasopressin, but, you know, mainly dopamine. Media, I would actually say, is dopamine, again, in terms of curiosity. The very concept, like news, for instance, is because new, so novelty, anything new stimulates dopamine, so long as it isn't threatening, in which case it would stimulate adrenaline. If the kind of media you're addicted to is... It depends on the type of media, I guess, to some degree. For instance, if you're addicted to horror, if you're addicted to, you know, news reports, which are always, you know, scary and gruesome, then it may be more of a adrenaline issue. However, in that case, I would not say it's necessarily low adrenaline. It's more that you are addicted to adrenaline for reasons we talked about earlier, because it energizes you, because it gives you clarity, because it gives you focus. So I'd say it's really down to a dopamine deficiency, because if you really knew, you'd be far happier with dopamine rather than adrenaline. And if the type of, I really like the type of media of comedy, for instance, and so for me, that would be because it stimulates like endocannabinoids specifically, and dopamine. It's always dopamine. Sex.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm hearing dopamine quite a lot. So sounds like it's got a lot to answer for.
Yeah, when we get to the substances, there'll be a lot more variety. But this is what I was saying, most of these activity are really dopamine. And that's why I'd say, if you have addictive personality, if you say that about yourself, if you're genuinely addicted to a lot of this stuff, then yeah, I would definitely suspect dopamine. Gambling is all about dopamine. There's also adrenaline in there. Sex is all about dopamine. Again, there's adrenaline in there with the risk and and then, maybe to some degree there's oxytocin, but I don't think there's a lot of bonding going on really with sex addicts. There is this thing called love addicts, actually. And I guess in the case of a love addict, they would be addicted to oxytocin, that feeling of bonding with someone else. So I didn't put that on my list, but that is a thing. There's a whole community of people who call themselves that, love addicts. So with foods, it varies a little bit. Protein will stimulate more dopamine. Carbohydrates will stimulate more serotonin. And fat can stimulate more oxytocin. And all food, to some degree, stimulates GABA, because eating calms you down no matter what you're eating, to some degree. And then there's the substances. And you can often tell what someone's neurochemical imbalance is just by what substances they are drawn to. So if you're drawn more to stimulants, then you might well be addicted to adrenaline and noradrenaline, like we talked about, but probably what you're really lacking is dopamine. You would feel better. You would be able to get all the presence and clarity and energy and all the rest of it from dopamine without all the negative effects from adrenaline and noradrenaline. So stimulants, so coffee, so caffeine in general, amphetamine, cocaine, ephedrine, things like that. And all the things that contain them, which is a hell of a lot. If you're attracted to opiates, then that indicates an endorphin deficiency, possibly also endocannabinoids. They seem to be wrapped up a little bit. If you are addicted to cannabis, I know some people believe that that's not possible. I don't believe that. I believe it is a biochemical addiction. For me, it was the hardest addiction to quit. I found quitting nicotine, which is supposed to be so addictive, a lot easier than quitting cannabis. And I've just the other day I heard someone else saying the same. It's just the withdrawal looks very different. So it's obviously cannabis withdrawal is not as serious as opiate withdrawal and alcohol withdrawal, right? Opiate and alcohol withdrawal can be life-threatening. They're extremely suffering, but you do experience a lot of suffering with cannabis. It's just not a type that's easy to recognize. And it's the suffering of boredom. When you habitually use cannabinoids and then you stop, everything seems so boring. So there's no kind of joy in anything. And that's kind of related to dopamine, but it is also related to the endocannabinoids. The endocannabinoids, this is one of the criticisms I've seen with cannabis, which I think is absolutely true, is it makes you feel happy to do nothing, right? Whereas, you should feel happy because you're achieving something, or, even if it's connecting with someone or nature or something, you should be achieving something. And with cannabis, you're happy achieving nothing at all, just talking nonsense all night or whatever. And so that is because it kills boredom to me. That's my understanding of it. I also think it gives, a perception of spiritual connection, whether that's accurate or not, I've already addressed earlier. But it does give a perception of being connected to something greater than yourself. And if you don't have that, that can also be very, very compelling. So I guess, the withdrawal from cannabis would be, a lack of feeling connected to something greater than yourself, and boredom. So, you feel kind of isolated and bored. It's not a great feeling, but obviously it's not as bad as like the DTs or whatever. Alcohol. indicates a GABA deficiency, as do the benzos, the anti-anxiety medications, substances, things like kava as well. What's the other one that's popular these days? Kratom, although that's got some opiate activity as well. But things that are calming, generally that's a GABA deficiency. Alcohol is the number one GABA stimulator, I would say. GABA is the thing that makes you feel calm. It's also the thing that reduces the impact of the superego, which is the should part of you. We talked about earlier about the conflict between I want to feel good now versus I want to do the right thing. So
what I want now versus what I like the big overall what I want.
Yes. So what is good overall is more to do with the prefrontal cortex, right at the front of the brain, what is called the superego in classic psychology. And then what I want now is more due to the other end, the brain stem, the lizard part of the brain, sometimes called the id. And so there's this classic conflict between those two parts of yourself. And I mean, you can tell the perspective of this podcast is that, connecting with the superego is a good thing. But I understand why a lot of people don't want to, because the superego is this kind of thing that plagues you. So if you are a person who, takes the easy route a lot of the time, takes the route of pleasure and all the rest of it, your conscience is just constantly hassling you. Why did you break your word? Why did you do this? Why did you lie to this person? Why did you hurt this person? All the rest of it. And so to shut that up, you drank alcohol. Now, GABA is not a bad thing. I do believe, as I've talked about in the previous podcast, that beautiful, perfect combination of GABA and dopamine actually creates that flow state, because it makes you feel calm and relaxed and present and zen-like, not bothered by things, and at the same time, very motivated and clear and energized and joyful and enthusiastic. So to me, that's a flow state. So GABA is a good thing, but I think often GABA is used for the wrong reasons, to suppress the superego or simply just to calm down, which is a bit, also understandable. What other categories of drugs are there? Oh yeah, tobacco. So tobacco and nicotine does stimulate dopamine, but it also works on acetylcholine, the memory and thinking molecule. So probably of all drugs, it's the best as the kind of normal drugs, it's the best as a nootropic, so helping you think better and more clearly. So it does that as well as giving you that dopamine hit.
What about ecstasy?
Oh yeah, good question. So ecstasy is oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine. So ecstasy is MDMA, and the MA of MDMA is methylamphetamine. So it's simply methylamphetamine with something added. So methylamphetamine is extremely strong dopamine, and so is ecstasy. But ecstasy also adds that serotonin, which is that feeling of importance, and it also adds that feeling of connection. Does it also perhaps work on other centers? Maybe, maybe to do with DMT, dimethyltryptamine, but not necessarily. I haven't seen any research that it does. I'm just speculating. And then, I guess that does lead us to the psychedelics, right? And so they absolutely work on dopamine. They absolutely work on serotonin. However, people are rarely addicted to the psychedelics, which is why I didn't think of them. We're talking about addictions here rather than drug uses. The only kind of thing that sometimes classes as psychedelic that people are addicted to is cannabis. But still, if you really love psychedelics, it can indicate low dopamine, low serotonin, and that you're trying to get it in a way that you feel is, better than the more standard stuff for that. But I won't comment too much on psychedelics. It's a different conversation. People are rarely addicted to them.
Oh, and this has been absolutely educational, especially, I really loved your, the 4 steps, especially diving deep into the unbending intent. So thank you for that. Before we come to a close, do you have any final thoughts for anyone that, may be going through some addictions and compulsions?
Yeah. Other than, following what I said, the one other thing I want to add is, even though I didn't do it, I do believe it is a good idea to reach out for help in the vast majority of cases. whether it's rehab, whether it's some kind of support group therapy, the AA meetings or any of those kind of variants of that. I kind of wish I'd have done that in retrospect. I don't think it would have maybe made a difference in me being able to quit, but it would have made it a lot less unpleasant. And maybe I would have made some great friendships and had some interesting experiences and all the rest of it. So I'm definitely not against that, even though I didn't mention it. But I am. So I feel that those things are great. It's just, as I said, they have a very low success rate, which I think they freely admit. So that's why I want to provide the thing that I think they're missing. But I would strongly recommend, doing them as well. I think that they can help. The other thing that I would say is, we talked about the issue of the disease thing. And I just want to touch on this before we finish, which is, if you're an addict, are you a victim? And I would say the answer is, kind of, right? In the sense that you are born with this neurological biochemical imbalance, so in the sense that it's impossible to feel good if you're just a neutral because of this genetic inheritance. Yeah, you could say you're a victim of that. And then also in terms of, the upbringing you've had or whatever trauma and neglect, abuse, etc., you're a victim of that. And in terms of, the example that you had from other people, whether it's family, friends, or whatever, that led you to the addiction you're in, you could say that you're the victim of that. Although depending on the circumstances, you may be more responsible for that. But to some degree, you could say I was really unlucky that everyone in my family was an addict and then I became one too. That makes sense. But here's the thing. Victimhood and unbending intent are completely antithetical to each other. And so it is true to say that you're a victim of many things. Definitely, certainly genetics, right? How can that be your fault? But you're just born with that. But it's not helpful to focus on that, is what I would say. Because as soon as you indulge in any thoughts of victimhood, those thoughts of victimhood will become the excuses for not sticking to what you said you were going to do, which will destroy your unbending intent. So I would suggest that even though your victim is 100% true, and you absolutely should honor your feelings, we've really talked about that. The whole problem in the first place is avoiding your feelings. So do not avoid feelings and emotions, but do dismiss thoughts of victimhood. To me, that's a really crucial distinction. Not the feeling, but the thought. Oh, I'm so unlucky. It's so much harder for me than someone else. It may be true. As I've just said, I've just given you an absolutely cast iron reason. And, if you get a genetic report, you'll have it, printed out and written in paper as to why it is harder for you than someone else. It's true. And yet, focusing on that will only destroy your progress, unfortunately. It may not to begin with, because to begin with, it's like accepting, okay, this is reality. This is me as I am. It is more hard for me than someone else. For someone else, I may be able to do it easily. For me, it's very hard. All of that's good. That's useful information. That's great. But then you've got to say, okay, but I'm going to start doing this thing no matter what, or I'm going to stop doing this thing no matter what. And then when an excuse comes up, the excuse usually will be victimhood. If it's not, I think victimhood and practicalities are the two most common things, like I have to because of this situation right now, or I have to because I feel so bad, or because my life's so hard, or because, it's really one of those two things. And the victimhood excuse is way more powerful emotionally. It's way easier to give into than the practicality ones. It's more possible to be reasonable and go, oh, I don't have to give into the addiction, because of X, Y, Z. You can be more rational with practicalities. But with, because life is unfair, no one ever loves me, no one loves me. Like, these are quite powerful things that you can't talk yourself out of very easily. And so with them, it's prioritizing that I'm going to be a person of integrity. I'm going to be true to myself, and I'm going to be true to my word, no matter what. That has to become more important than your victimhood. And I believe that is, really the biggest factor once a person is already on the path and already attempting it.
Very well said. Very well said. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Please remember to leave your comments in the section below. Ask us your questions, please. We will definitely get back to you and respond. And so also please remember to support our podcast. Please like and subscribe the videos, and we will see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode. And one of the ones I recommend is just here, if you want to click there. Or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.